Hey everybody, and welcome to week 3 of this class. I hope you are enjoying the content up to this point. Obviously, what we've been predominantly looking at is some of the early history of what would eventually become the United States. But now we're going to begin to place the colonial period into I guess what you could call a more narrow context, and we're going to begin to look at the road towards the American Revolution. And I have a tendency to want to look more broadly at that road than perhaps some other professors do, or perhaps your high school history teacher did, to try and understand why we went to war against the British. We have to look past just the taxes. We have to look beyond them. Okay, obviously the catalyst behind much of the tension which will result in the American Revolution had to do with a series of taxes that were levied by Greenville, by the King, George III, by Parliament, various taxes that you're probably aware of, like the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, among others. But in order to understand why the English colonials, we'll now just refer to them as Americans, the reason why they respond to these taxes the way they do has much to do with the way in which they came to think about the relationship between the government and the people themselves. And a lot of that has to do with a movement that took place largely in Europe, but it did make its way to the United States. And that movement was called the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment philosophers, and there were many, they spoke about a range of topics, but the one thinker who was really writing at the very beginning of the Enlightenment is a man by the name of John Locke. And if you've ever heard the Declaration of Independence, you are already familiar, or at least have heard much of what Locke's ideas are. And so we're going to be talking this week about the Enlightenment. The other movement that we're going to be talking about is the Great Awakening, the First Great Awakening, which was a religious revival. And in many ways, this is probably the very first really American movement. It is a movement that cut across gender boundaries, racial boundaries. It was a movement that pretty much everyone in the American colonies would have experienced on some level or another. And although the Enlightenment is more of a secular movement and the First Great Awakening is a religious, largely a Protestant Christian movement, both of them really sort of lead people to a very similar position, and that is a place of thinking for themselves, the ability to choose your government, for example, or the ability to choose your minister, to choose your way towards salvation, right? Both of these movements sort of lead people to think about their ability to choose and to think individually. And that, of course, that way of thinking is going to come right on the hills, if you will. Or not the hills, it's actually coming before the Enlightenment. I'm sorry, the taxes that will be levied upon them. So when these taxes are levied upon them, the way in which the colonials begin to think about themselves and their relationship to their government, what have you, it ultimately responds with the American Revolution. So we're going to be diving into that today. We'll also be looking at the French and Indian War and a number of things which will ultimately lead the English colonials towards declaring their independence and starting the American Revolution. So that's what we got going on this week. As always, please make sure that you respond by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. to the discussion board, and then of course by Sunday at 11:59, make sure that you respond not only to another student, but also to any comments that I make. As you probably are aware at this point, anytime that I provide comments or questions to you to ask you to maybe elaborate on something or to respond to a question or clarify something, I am really doing that as a way to not only to get you to think more deeply about the content, but also to provide you with more points. So make sure you get that going. And then other than that, that's pretty much what we got going for this week. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I will leave you as I always do. So go in peace, be warm and filled. May the force be with you, live long and prosper. May the odds forever be in your favor. Have a great week, guys.